Ethan Blackwood sat quietly by the window, the soft rays of the morning sun gently illuminating his face. His dark eyes, intense yet thoughtful, gazed out into the sprawling cityscape below, though his mind was far from the bustling world outside. The past few months had been a blur of meetings, late nights, and what felt like an endless cycle of events that seemed to be pushing him further away from himself. He had always been good at hiding his emotions, at masking his inner struggles with a calm, collected exterior. But as he sat in his dimly lit apartment, a deep sense of unease gnawed at him. A part of him felt like he was living someone else's life, caught in a routine that lacked meaning or purpose. The success he had built, the wealth and influence, seemed to ring hollow in the silence of the room. It was as though everything he had worked for had come at the cost of something much more precious: his soul. Ethan wasn't sure when it had started, but over time, a subtle shift had occurred. The world, once so vivid and full of opportunities, now felt distant, even cold. He found himself questioning the path he had taken, the choices that had led him to where he was today. In a life defined by achievement and outward success, he had become painfully aware of an inner emptiness, an ache he couldn't explain. His thoughts wandered back to the conversations he had had with his mentor, a wise old man named Samuel, who had taught him more about the world than he had ever learned in any boardroom. Samuel often spoke of something he called true awakening, a state of awareness that transcended the material and the superficial. Ethan had always dismissed it as mere philosophy, something nice to think about but ultimately irrelevant to his fast-paced life. But now, sitting in the quiet of his apartment, he wondered if Samuel had been right. It was only a few days ago that Ethan had received a letter, one that seemed to appear out of nowhere, delivered in the most unexpected manner. It had no return address, no official markings, just his name written in elegant handwriting on the front. Inside was a simple message: **, you are being called. The time has come to awaken **. At first, Ethan had thought it was a prank, some sort of elaborate joke designed to mess with him. But there was something about the letter, something that struck a chord deep within him. The words echoed in his mind, gnawing at him like a persistent whisper. He could not shake the feeling that this message was meant for him, that it was somehow connected to the restlessness he had been feeling for so long. He stood up from his chair and walked over to his small bookshelf, scanning the titles of books he had collected over the years. Philosophy, psychology, business, all the things he had consumed in an effort to understand the world and himself. But none of them provided the answers he sought. His gaze lingered on a thick, leather-bound book sitting on the top shelf. It was an old book, one Samuel had given him years ago, with a title that seemed out of place in Ethan's modern world: The Path of the Seeker. Without thinking, Ethan reached for the book and pulled it down. As he opened it, the pages seemed to come alive with the wisdom of ages, as though the words themselves had been waiting for this moment. He flipped through the pages, scanning the various teachings and passages, until one sentence caught his eye: The journey of awakening is not a path of ease, but one that leads to the truest self. It was a simple statement, yet it resonated with him more than anything he had read in a long time. Ethan sat down on his couch, the book resting in his hands, and allowed the weight of the words to settle over him. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of clarity. Maybe this was the answer he had been searching for, the beginning of something profound. The doorbell rang, breaking his trance. Startled, Ethan closed the book and placed it on the coffee table. He glanced at the clock. It was early, far too early for any of his usual visitors. When he opened the door, He was greeted by an older woman dressed in a long, flowing robe, her eyes bright with purpose. "Mr. Blackwood," she said with a calm but firm voice, "it is time." Ethan stared at her for a moment, unsure of what she meant. "Time for what?" "The awakening," she replied simply, as though the answer was obvious. "You have been chosen. The journey begins now." Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the woman who had appeared at his apartment. She didn't look like anyone he knew. There was an air about her, a certain quiet authority that made his usual skepticism feel insignificant. Her gaze was unwavering, as though she saw straight through him, past the walls he had so carefully constructed around himself. He had no idea who she was or how she knew him, but in that moment, something in his gut told him that this was no coincidence. She had come for him, and perhaps she had been waiting for this moment much longer than he had. "Who are you?" Ethan asked, his voice sounding smaller than he had intended. The woman smiled gently, a smile that was both comforting and unnerving. "My name is Evelyn. I have been sent to guide you." Her voice was soft, but there was an undercurrent of authority in every word. "And I think you already know why." Ethan frowned, his mind racing. He had been expecting something, a sign, a change, maybe even an answer, but not this. He was a man of logic, of reason, and everything about this encounter was beyond his understanding. "Guide me where?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Evelyn's gaze softened as she looked past him, taking in the minimalist decor of his apartment. She stepped forward, her movements graceful but deliberate, and entered without waiting for an invitation. "To the path of awakening," she said simply. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. That phrase again, the path of awakening. The letter, Samuel's teachings, and now this woman. All of it seemed to be pulling him toward something he couldn't yet comprehend. He instinctively stepped back, trying to gather his thoughts. "I don't understand," he said, his tone guarded. "What do you want from me? What is all of this?" Evelyn turned to face him fully, her expression steady but full of compassion. "What I want, Mr. Blackwood, is to help you see the truth that has always been with you, but which you have yet to recognize." Ethan felt a surge of frustration. Truth? What truth? He had spent his entire life chasing goals, chasing success, yet here he was, questioning everything, questioning himself. The weight of it all was becoming unbearable. "I don't need some spiritual awakening or whatever you're talking about," he said, trying to regain control of the situation. "I've built a life. I have everything I need." Evelyn's eyes softened, but there was a sadness in them now. "You've built an empire, Mr. Blackwood, but at what cost?" she asked gently. "You've achieved success in the eyes of the world, but that success has not brought you peace. You have everything, yet you are empty. Do you not feel it? The emptiness inside you?" Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. How could she know that? How could she understand the weight that had been pressing on his chest for months, if not years? He had never voiced his inner turmoil to anyone, not even Samuel, despite the many late-night conversations they had shared. He had always kept it hidden, buried beneath his drive for success, his obsession with achievement. But Evelyn's words cut straight through the facade he had so carefully built. I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, feeling a flush of embarrassment creep up his neck. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. Instead, she moved to the window and gazed out at the city below. The skyline stretched before them, a testament to human ambition and innovation. But to Ethan, it now felt like a cold, empty world, a world that no longer held the same promise it once had. "You're afraid," she said softly, without turning around. "Afraid of what lies beyond the life you've built. Afraid of the unknown. But it's only when we step into the unknown that we truly begin to find ourselves." Ethan felt a pang of doubt gnaw at his chest. He was afraid. Of course he was. What would his life look like without the empire he had built, without the identity he had crafted for himself? He had spent so long shaping his reality, his self-worth tied to his accomplishments, that the thought of tearing it all down was terrifying. "You don't have to do it alone," Evelyn continued, turning back to face him. "You were not meant to walk this path by yourself. We are all connected by something greater than our egos, our fears, our limitations. And you have been called to awaken, Ethan. The time has come for you to see beyond the surface." Ethan's mind was spinning. He was torn between the pull of curiosity, the lure of something greater, and the fear of stepping into an unknown world that promised nothing but uncertainty. "I can't just abandon everything," he said, more to himself than to Evelyn. "I've worked too hard. I've sacrificed too much." Evelyn's expression softened once more, and she took a step closer to him. "You have not abandoned anything, Ethan. You have simply been given the opportunity to reclaim what is truly yours. The life you have built is not wrong, but it is incomplete. There is a deeper purpose for you, a purpose that transcends the material." She reached into her robe and pulled out a small, intricate object, a medallion with an ancient symbol etched into its surface. She placed it gently in his hand. "This medallion is a symbol of your awakening," she said. "It will guide you when you are ready. It will remind you that you are not alone, and that you have been chosen for something far greater than you can imagine." Ethan stared at the medallion, his fingers tracing the delicate engraving. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, ancient and timeless, yet it felt strangely familiar. "The path of awakening is not easy," Evelyn warned, her tone growing more serious. "It will challenge everything you think you know about yourself, about the world, and about the nature of existence. But it is the only path that will lead you to true freedom." Ethan's heart raced. The idea of freedom, the kind that didn't come from money or power, but from within, was an intoxicating thought. But was he ready for it? Was he willing to face the truths about himself that he had spent so long avoiding? He looked up at Evelyn, the question burning in his eyes. "How do I begin?" She smiled. "You have already begun, Ethan. The first step is to trust the process. To trust that you are being guided by something greater than yourself." And with that, the room seemed to shift. The walls, which had once felt so familiar, now seemed distant, almost irrelevant. Ethan felt the weight of the medallion in his hand, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something stir inside him. A flicker of hope, a sense of possibility. The morning after Evelyn's visit, Ethan found himself standing on the balcony of his apartment. The city spread out before him like an intricate web of glass and steel. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the streets below. It was a moment of stillness, one he didn't often allow himself to experience. Usually, his days began in a rush, fueled by coffee, emails, and the constant hum of his to-do list. But today was different. Something had shifted inside him during the night. He looked down at the medallion Evelyn had given him, which now rested in the palm of his hand. The ancient symbol engraved into its surface was no longer just a mysterious artifact. It felt significant, almost as if it was waiting for him to unlock its purpose. He had barely slept, his mind racing with thoughts of what Evelyn had said, of the awakening she promised, of the path he was about to walk. Ethan had always prided himself on his ability to control his life. His success had been the result of years of discipline, of calculated decisions that had led him to the top of his field. But Evelyn's words had stirred something within him, a hunger, an uncertainty that he couldn't ignore. What if there was more to life than the career he had built? What if his true purpose lay somewhere beyond the empire he had spent his entire life constructing? He rubbed his thumb over the symbol on the medallion, lost in thought. It was beautiful, almost hypnotic. The edges were smooth, worn by time, yet the design itself felt timeless. It wasn't the kind of thing he would normally be drawn to, but something about it felt right, felt connected. The sound of his phone vibrating on the table inside his apartment broke his reverie. He glanced at it, sighing when he saw the name on the screen. Samuel. The man had been a constant presence in his life, his mentor, his guide. But lately, Samuel's calls had become a source of tension, an unwelcome reminder of a life Ethan had almost outgrown. Ethan let the phone ring out. He wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Not now. Not when he was still trying to process everything Evelyn had told him. Turning away from the balcony, Ethan walked to his desk and picked up the letter Samuel had sent him weeks ago. The letter that had started this whole chain of events. The words were still fresh in his mind. You are on the brink of something great, Ethan. The path you are walking is about to shift. But you must be ready to let go of everything you think you know. The letter had been cryptic, and at the time, Ethan had dismissed it as nothing more than a strange metaphor. But now, as he sat with the medallion in his hand, the words felt prophetic. Perhaps Samuel had known this moment was coming, even if Ethan hadn't. He stuffed the letter back into his desk drawer and stood up, walking over to the window once more. The city below him seemed to hum with life, unaware of the internal shift happening in the heart of one of its most prominent residents. Ethan had been a part of this world for so long, a player in the game of corporate politics, that it was hard to imagine walking away from it all. But something deep inside him told him he had to try. The next few days passed in a blur. Ethan went through the motions of his usual routine, attending meetings, making decisions, and overseeing the operations of his business. But each moment felt hollow, as though he were detached from the reality around him. The weight of the medallion in his pocket was a constant reminder that something was changing, even if he couldn't yet grasp what it was. On the third day after Evelyn's visit, he found himself unable to focus. His mind wandered to the path Evelyn had spoken of, to the promise of awakening and the unknown future that lay ahead. He had tried to reach out to Samuel, but his mentor had been unreachable. It was as if the universe was pushing him to confront this journey on his own, without the familiar guidance of those he trusted. That afternoon, as he sat in his office, staring out at the skyline, there was a knock on the door. He didn't expect anyone, but the interruption was welcome. Ethan was desperate for something, anything, to break the monotony. "Come in," he called out, his voice sounding less sure of himself than usual. The door opened slowly, and a woman entered. She was tall, with dark hair that cascaded down her back in soft waves. Her eyes were a striking shade of green, bright and intense, as if she could see straight into his soul. She wore a long, flowing coat, and her presence seemed to fill the room with an energy that felt both calming and electrifying. "Mr. Blackwood?" she said, her voice soft yet firm. Ethan blinked in surprise. He didn't recognize her, and yet there was something oddly familiar about her. She didn't seem like a business associate, nor did she fit the mold of someone he would expect to walk into his office. "Yes, I'm Ethan Blackwood. Can I help you?" The woman smiled slightly, but there was a knowing look in her eyes. "My name is Aurora. I've come to speak with you about the path you are about to walk." Ethan froze. Another stranger with cryptic messages about his awakening. He was starting to feel like he was trapped in some kind of elaborate riddle, and it was beginning to wear on him. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Aurora didn't seem fazed by his resistance. Instead, she stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "You are not meant to walk this journey alone, Ethan. You are being watched, guided even, by forces greater than you can comprehend. The path you are on is not an accident. You were chosen for something greater." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He had heard these words before from Evelyn, from Samuel, and now from this woman, Aurora. But what did they all mean? What greater purpose was he being prepared for? And why did it feel like everything he had ever known was being pulled out from under him? "You're not the first to come to me with these messages," Ethan said, his voice growing tight. "What do you want from me? Why are all of you doing this?" Aurora's eyes softened, and she took another step forward. "We are not doing this to you, Ethan. We are doing this for you, because you are ready, whether you know it or not." Ethan felt a strange warmth wash over him. It was as if the very air in the room had changed. He wasn't sure if it was the intensity of the conversation or something more profound, but he felt as though the world around him had shifted, if only for a moment. "Ready for what?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Aurora smiled, the same knowing smile that Evelyn had worn. "You're ready to begin your awakening. The real journey begins now. But first, you must understand the truth about yourself." If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel to support more powerful storytelling like this. And don't stop there. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next video. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below to let us know how this story impacted you or what you'd like to see next. Your feedback helps us create meaningful content that connects with you. Thank you for being a part of our community. Your voice matters,